Get started.
Terrific. Well, great. Let me welcome everybody to this gathering for us to report out on the results of work we've been doing with this task force on foundational competencies in educational measurement. My name is Derek Briggs. I'm the former NCME president for 21-22, and this work came out of one of my presidential initiatives. And I thought it might be actually helpful to say a little bit briefly about how I chose the members of this task force. I did actually first reach out to the members of the NCME, the educators of measurement, to ask them if they could each, there are three people that were leading educators of measurement, actually four at the time, asked them if they could submit nominations of people they thought would be really terrific in this role. So I got those nominations. And so a lot of the people that ended up on this task force came from those original nominations. I then worked really hard to make sure that the task force could be as diverse in every way that I could think about diversity. And I think I was fairly successful and very pleased with the members that were able to accept my invitation. And what I'm going to read to you actually is the invitation I sent them. I'm really proud to say that virtually every single person that I contacted to take part of this service actually agreed to do it. And it's pretty remarkable. So I thought I'd actually just read what my invitation to them was and how I framed the task that we engaged on. So what I wrote to them is that I'm writing in my capacity as president to invite you to join a task force I'm convening to make recommendations that will help shape the education and preparation of the next generation of educational measurement professionals. And I wrote, on the one hand, there has never been a better time to learn about the methods and practices of educational measurement. There are so many incredible resources that are just a few clicks of a button away, so long as one has a connection to the internet. On the other hand, we know that most people, especially in the US, who self-identify as psychometricians or measurement specialists, tend to arrive in the field through idiosyncratic channels. Few people have a disciplinary background in psychology. Some may know very little about education. And many of the kinds of people that might have previously self-identified as psychometricians or statisticians may now see themselves as data scientists. Are there foundational competencies that we expect any newly arriving member to the educational measurement profession to know and be able to do? If so, how can we build a consensus around these foundational competencies and develop them among students? Imagine if there were an NCME consensus document that answered this question. It could be as broad as a framework or as detailed as a curriculum. Such a document could help to improve the visibility and standing of the field. It could attract talented and committed undergraduate students to important work. It could cohere and improve instruction among and within graduate programs. It could improve the skills and readiness of incoming professionals to measurement organizations. And it could serve as the basis for a license and certification program in educational measurement. So my charge to the task force was threefold. First, to develop and maintain consensus foundational competencies for the field of educational measurement. Two, to illustrate one or more curricular models for a graduate program in educational measurement. And three, to make these public through conference presentations and possible joint publications in educational measurement issues in practice and or the Journal of Educational Measurement. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Andrew.
Great, thank you, Derek. And again, it's great to see, first of all, so many task force members, but also all the great folks in the audience, and we very much look forward to your feedback. I was asked, Derek asked me to chair this task force, and I think just in that ask, for those of you who know him and know me, you can see that he was looking to build consensus among people who have different viewpoints. Derek and I often disagree, and I hope we often disagree productively, and similarly, folks in this task force often disagreed. And I just want to say, just from as a personal reflection, that this task force was the intellectual highlight of my past year. It was truly rewarding and gratifying and exhilarating and surprising to think about what the foundational competencies in this, our field might be, and to see how people come to this question with different experiences, different beliefs, and yet we did come to a tentative consensus among ourselves. And now it's time to test that consensus and hopefully continue to build consensus among us as a measurement community. Of course, not all of us will agree, but again, just as I hope Derek and I have done, and I hope all of our task force members have done, that when we disagree productively, right? So I'll talk a little bit about our process, and then we're going to briefly present our framework, and then we're going to listen, right? This is a listening session, and we very much look forward to hearing your questions, potential concerns, and then addressing them in the revision of this task force report. So what was our process? We met roughly monthly from October 2021 through August of 2022. We look forward to continuing to meet once we collect your questions and feedback and work towards a final draft of this document. Just want to give you a little bit of a sense of our past experiences. This is us meeting in hybrid form in San Diego at our NCME meeting, having a task force lunch and debating our work further. And I want to set out before we introduce the framework, what consumed at least the first 2 or 3 meetings that we had, which is, what does this charge really mean? What are foundational competencies in educational measurement? And although the charge sounds clear, of course, we all like to be very clear about what does foundational mean? What does competencies mean? What does educational mean? What does measurement mean? And I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense. You'll see this on page 4 of our report of where we came down when it came to guiding principles that helped us with our subsequent discussion and ultimate consensus. First, foundational competencies are foundational. You will not see the entirety of educational measurement 4th edition in our foundational competencies. But it is our belief that if you have these foundational competencies, it gives you the ability to continue learning in this field, right? So they are foundational in the sense that they support the acquisition of future, more specific competencies that you may see, for example, in EM5 and EM4 and EM5 and all the current journals of our field. So they do not have to be exhaustive, they have to be foundational. Number 2, foundational competencies may or may not be unique to educational measurement. You may say, well, that competency is necessary for many other fields and disciplines, and that is okay. The question is whether it is also foundational for our field. And you will see, in addition, some educational measurement competencies that are relatively specific to our field. Third, foundational competencies overlap and interact. We do not see any of these competency domains or subdomains as an island. Obviously, there's rich and complex concepts in the intersections of these and the overlap among these competency domains and subdomains. Fourth, foundational competencies are descriptive and aspirational. One of the things that we came to acknowledge is that I might not be good at all of these foundational competencies. I still have room to grow and learn in some of these foundational areas. So it's not just descriptive about what our experts and what our members know, it's also about what we hope we aspire for them to know in the future. And fifth, educational measurement here is broadly conceived, right? We take a broad perspective on what education is. It's not just K-12, for example. And we also take a broad perspective of what the educational measurement is. And you'll see that written out in our provisional definitions on pages 4 and 5. The full report has 3 parts. Part 1 presents foundational competencies, which we'll discuss today. Part 2 is about careers, and part 3 is about curricula. You can think of part 2 and part 3 as a test of whether or not part 1 works. Right? If foundational competencies are indeed foundational, we should see how careers require them and further develop them. And if they are indeed foundational competencies, then so too should our curricula develop them, and that you can think of them as a test. However, today we will focus on part 1, on the framework for foundational competencies. And I just want to give a plug because next Tuesday at 3 p.m. on October 11th, the Educators of Measurement Special Interest Group, the NCME Special Interest Groups, will be hosting a webinar that we welcome all of you to join that's more focused on part 3, and our task force looks forward to that discussion as well. With that, I'm so pleased to toss it to hand it off to various members of the task force to present these various competency domains and subdomains. You will see that we have a unifying framework that we wrote out as a visual here. And you can follow along with all the specifics at this link here, bit.ly/NCME task force draft. And again, we request that you send your comments to ncme@tally.com by Halloween. Hopefully it won't be too spooky. So with that, we're going to go through the competency domains and then the subdomains. And I am very, very pleased to pass it off first and foremost to my fellow task force member, Sue Lottridge. Sue.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Derek. So the first, or domain one, communication and collaboration competencies, covers what you would imagine communication and collaboration. So here, communication we define as being able to communicate in various modalities around your research designs, your plans for educational measurement projects, your ability to describe your methods, the results, as well as the interpretation of those results to various stakeholders of various levels with regard to technical competence, as well as experience with educational measurement in general. And the collaboration competencies really reflect the ability to work with a wide variety of folks in the measurement field to improve how we do measurement. So those could be item designers, those could be program managers, those could be engineers. And it's simply, in order to really do educational measurement, you need to be able to collaborate with others on this fairly complex endeavor. That covers it. I'll hand it off to, I think, Stephanie.
Yes. Okay. So domain 2 is technical, statistical, and computational competencies. And so this domain is where we kind of recognize the distinction between measurement and the statistics and research methods that we use to analyze the results from measurement procedures. So statistical competencies, as we described in the report, are things like understanding sampling theory methods, exploratory data analysis, multi-level modeling, Bayesian methods, that kind of thing. Technical skills then would include things like using statistical software to manage the data and to perform the analyses, to do simulations, to generate reports. And then computational competencies would be things like being able to write software code and software programs and to understand the logic and the purpose of the algorithms in those programs. And these competencies are becoming more important as we have increasing access to more and more data and more powerful tools for analyzing data. So as an example, someone who has competency in this domain might be able to gather data from a measurement application and then develop, adapt, and evaluate statistical models or methods to analyze those data and interpret the results appropriately. And so this can involve things like automatic content generation or analyzing cognitive process data.
Wonderful. We'll pass it on to Mike.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm going to step back real quickly just to orient folks to this idea of domains and subdomains, and then I'm going to talk about the first subdomain in educational measurement. So for me, on the left-hand side of the diagram, where you have the communication, education, and technical, we use the term domain to basically capture a large body or set of knowledge and skills and abilities within a given area. Because we're focusing on competencies in educational measurement, we then go into much greater detail on the competencies within those. And we use the term subdomain then for 5 broad areas of competencies within educational measurement competencies. The first one that we'll talk about is what we call context, social, cultural, historical, and political. We see that as effectively an umbrella competence that cuts across pretty much everything that folks do in our field. And it basically requires some level of awareness of social factors, cultural factors, historical and political factors that influence the design, development, implementation, and interpretations of tests and assessment programs. And just as a quick example of something that we might mean in here, a few years ago, I became aware of intersectionality theory, and that helped open up the way that I think about bias and the study of bias, and it fundamentally changed the way that I think about groups. And so that would be an example of a social and historical context that then shaped the type of work that we might do in our field. I'll pass this off. I'm not sure who's doing the validity section next.
We have
I'll,
Michael.
I'll jump in. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Mike. So glad Mike gave a little bit of that context. So just as context is that really the big umbrella under which all of this work exists, under which our knowledge and our practice exists, one of the foundational competency areas is validity, validation, and fairness. What separates us in educational measurement from pure mathematicians, statisticians, computational experts, and others that are primarily technicians is an understanding of the theories and practices of validity, validation, and fairness. So the social, cultural, historical, and political contexts were that first part of this domain, in part because all that we do is hopefully grounded in those realities as Mike described, and validity of score interpretations and uses occurs in those realities. We not only worry about precision and accuracy of scores, right? We worry about interpretations of scores given proposed uses, but many times it provides access, test scores provide access to opportunities, services, and careers for some individuals. So interpretation and uses is really important. And even as some examples, as I consult and as many of us consult on measurement projects across the globe, many of us get questions about whether an existing test can be used for new or novel purposes, uses for which the test perhaps wasn't initially developed. Fortunately, we can guide them through a series of questions regarding the nature of theory and evidence that may be available or may be missing for newly proposed uses of tests. Even questions about fairness include who benefits from the use of an assessment. And it includes notions of adverse impact, measurement and variance, multi-group prediction models. And it moves those statistical techniques into meaningful measurement practices, securing interpretations and uses defended by theory and evidence. I'm going to pass it on to Howard.
Thank you, Michael. The third subdomain in educational measurement competencies goes to the issue of instrument design and development. And this particular domain requires sets of skills that are not often discussed in educational measurement programs, training programs, and the like. And it requires that our people practicing in this area understand the processes and the procedures employed throughout the life cycle of an instrument design. Measurement instruments are a primary tool through which evidence is gathered for a variety of constructs. And my reading of the field is that there's no shortage of requests to develop more and different educational measurement instruments, from achievement instruments to measurements of aptitude and attitude, and more psychological domains like social emotional learning and the like. To do this work well, we argue in this report that our colleagues, our students, our learners, we refer to them as learners throughout the report, need to develop the skills and skill sets that allow them to do this work successfully. And they need to understand the theories behind the constructs that are being targeted. They need to understand why that construct is being targeted and not other constructs. And they need to work collaboratively with folks who are maybe not educational measurement specialists, but they may very well be subject matter specialists along the way, as well as test development teams and data collection groups within particular specifically professional, or I'm thinking of professional test development organizations here. So they need to develop those competencies and experiences in developing test blueprints, test design documents. Evidence-centered design, for example, is one of the ones that my group and others that I work with are using quite across the board these days. And that's a certain set of competencies that are not necessarily grounded in psychometrics or in mathematics, but they are key to, I think, making our field relevant and to make our ourselves and our colleagues really central contributors to the improvement and development of the measurement. In our report, we give some examples. I won't belabor them here. You can read the report. And so I'm happy to see that this subdomain is in here, because I really do think it's an important part of the work that our students, our learners, our colleagues should develop competencies in. I'll kick it back to Andrew. You're keeping the run of show list, so I'll give it back to you, Andrew.
Of course. Next up on the run of show is Matt. Great to see you, Matt.
Good to see Andrew. Thank you, Howard. Subdomain D, precision and generalization, focuses on estimating and interpreting the precision and generalizability of measurement results and estimates. With respect to precision, someone commented in this area knows how to estimate the precision and reliability of model estimates. They understand context around precision and how different measurement contexts have different requirements for precision and reliability. They understand that precision and generalizability, there's an interplay between the two, that precision is not static, rather there's an interaction, interplay with the sample, the test, the model, and other variables, other assessment variables. With respect to generalizability, a competent learner can identify generalization targets and limitations. A competent learner knows how to design studies to expand and learn more about the generalizability of results. This subdomain is foundational because as learners move from classical test theory to other measurement models and contexts, precision and generalization start to play a larger role in how these models are used and how results are interpreted. For example, within IRT, item response theory, students will learn that ability estimates are not equally precise as they were in classical test theory. And then we move towards item and test information. And then we see that this lack of precisional equality serves as the motivation for computer adaptive testing and much, much more beyond that. So definitely an important foundational competency. I will pass it back to Stephanie.
All right, and then subdomain E is psychometric modeling. So this is the subdomain that we would probably think of first when we hear about psychometrics or educational measurement. And this subdomain includes being familiar with psychometric methods so that an individual can make informed choices to select models, evaluate models, and interpret the results. In the report, we talked about how learners need to be familiar with a variety of psychometric models and approaches, including things like IRT, generalizability theory, SEM, latent class analysis, and so on. And so these would serve as building blocks for learning about even more models and methods, including new things that develop over time. And we talked about how learners should be familiar enough with these methods to be able to compare and contrast them from a variety of perspectives, including theoretical concerns and practical considerations. So as an example, someone who has competency in the psychometric modeling subdomain would likely be able to be purposeful in selecting a modeling approach for analyzing data, and then be able to use the results from that analysis to make decisions about the appropriateness of that modeling approach, interpret the results, and use the results in order to make recommendations.
That was wonderful. And again, you can see we wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, and we have succeeded in doing so. So I wanted to make sure to end by 3:30. I do want to give a shout out to other task force members who have shown up. So Sandeep Sinare is here, and in spite of having a cold, Alina Van Davier is also here on mute. She's driving in a car in some other country right now. Terry Ackerman will join shortly, and Debbie Bandalos is on the plane. So we are 12 strong, and all of us contributed to this draft report you see here. But now, again, really, we wanted to make sure to have an opportunity to hear from you. What questions do you have? What suggestions do you have for improvement? I strongly welcome you to chime in the chat. You can also raise your hand. I'll call on you one at a time. Keep in mind, we might not have answers for you. This is a listening session. We might be able to speak on behalf of ourselves as individuals, but if there's something you really want to see changed, of course, course, we'll have to take that under advisement as a task force in an ensuing consensus process. But we really are excited, and it is our charge to engage with you as an NCME membership. And again, knowing all of you here, you have a lot to say and a lot to suggest, and that is just going to be a continuing intellectual highlight for this year and the year to come. So with that, I would love to open it up to questions, comments, suggestions for improvement of any kind. The floor is open. Don't make me call on you, David, Deb, Dubravka, Catherine, Joanne, Leslie.
That's right. You
Lily.
know we'll do it. You know we'll do
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
We'll call
yeah.
you out. Come on.
I see Scott's lurking out there too.
Exactly.
So Andrew, I have a question that one of my students asked. Are you all thinking about certifying educational measurement specialists?
I'll just speak for as a matter of our conversations. This did come up as an interest. It was not our charge, but certainly, let's say in a hypothetical abstract sense, right? If this document were to work as intended, it would inform the development of competencies one would wish to assess in some kind of licensure and certification exam. Now, obviously, that raises a whole host of questions related to validity, validation, and fairness, Michael. But suffice to say, if this document were to work as intended, then it would support, we would hope that it would come into play and be one of the many references people would bring to thinking about what competencies were necessary. And we did discuss it, as a matter of fact. David, I'm going to take your unmuting yourself as video muting yourself as a raised hand and bring you into the conversation.
This is more of a general question. I was wondering if you discuss to what extent is problematic to think of learning how to measure something devoid of a context in which you're applying it. And how do you think about the interplay between the framework and the substantive knowledge that you need to apply it in a specific field?
Andrew, do you want us to respond?
Oh yes, every task force member can.
Yeah, I mean, so
David,
that is a great question. I mean, there's two ways in which I think we talked about this when you use the context. One is that the first subdomain is really all around thinking about context. And particularly we had long conversations around the political context and the importance of understanding the reasons for the development and use of a given test or assessment program. I think you're also referring in part to the kind of content context or content expertise and the need to have some content expertise in order to be able to design and develop a test instrument. That was also a point of conversation, and I think where we've kind of moved on that is that while a person coming into our field might not have the content expertise to design an instrument in a given area, they should be able to, through the first competency of communication and collaboration, be able to work with a content expert to collaboratively develop a sound instrument. So I think that's kind of how we thought about this.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just augment something Mike said. We struggled a lot, and we thought we created multiple versions of a graphical display to graphically convey some of these ideas, and we kind of rested on the old overlapping spheres of of influence and competencies. And it's really those interactions that are important. But I think Mike is right. My first reaction was, hey, that's our first area, communication and collaboration, because none of us should be doing this work in isolation. And I think that was the heart of your question, David. I appreciate that. The collaboration piece is really critical.
Yeah, let me also elaborate a bit. In the section on instrument design and development, I think you'll see if you read further down through the report, the more elaborated section on this. We did give a good deal of thought about the context in which you're working, not just the organizational context, but the cultural context and the intended uses in that context as being important during the design and development process. And as Michael, both Mike and Michael pointed out, the ability to collaborate and communicate well with subject matter experts. And sometimes those subject matter experts come from, other cultures. In my career, I've worked with folks to do measurement in Hong Kong, for example. Very different culture. Lots of conversations with those proposing instrument development about the cultural context of the items and the tasks and the communicative directions and other things. So you're raising, David, you're raising a very significant issue for us, and we grappled with it, and various curricular and preparation programs might handle it a bit differently depending upon their exposure to different cultural contexts.
Thank you very much. Your responses helped me think about the framework. I'm thinking, and thank you very much for all the work and the proposal.
Thanks, David. We look forward to hopefully discussing it with you again in the future. Scott, I'm not sure if you were on video muting to raise your hand too, but I'm happy to call on you. And again, I welcome others. Tim, I see you here too. Shalini, great to see you. Anyway, so lots of great folks in the audience. Please don't hesitate to chime in with questions or suggestions. Scott, go ahead.
So just echoing the thanks. First of all, I'm so impressed that a task force this size could produce a report that was only 27 pages. So that's a compliment in and of itself. So as now I'm cautious about what I'm going to say, and it relates to something Derek just put in the chat, and maybe I don't see it because I will meet the October 31st deadline and give you written comments, but I don't see anything in here on how people learn, on like what's the, I mean, and Howard, maybe Howard was asleep during that part of the discussion if we got to talk about that, but it's such a key part of really, I think, being a measurement professional today. Could you guys talk about maybe again?
Oh, could we?
Yes, maybe that was a subject of discussion.
You can bet. No, I'm happy to leave it to others. But yeah, I'd love everyone's thoughts on this, about the many conversations we had about this.
Andrew, I think it might be appropriate actually for you to lead us off here, because I think this hinges a little bit on the sort of how we thought about naming that particular subdomain. And I think your initial naming of it was one that really called out the importance of theories of learning and domain expertise, and then we felt like at the same time we really wanted to say that figures into instrumentation and instrument design. And so there was a question of, in my view, like, what do you name and what do people see as being the thing that people are most focused on in educational measurement? I think we ended up in a place in which we gave primacy in the naming to instrument development and design, but tried in our write-up to stress the importance of connection and understanding of theory in how you do that. But I think that unless you're reading in the details, that doesn't, in the first framework graphic, might not jump out the same way. And so but let me turn it back to you, Andrew. You could say a little bit more about that.
No, I actually think that's good, Derek. And one of the great things about a task force where you debate this long enough is that you're eventually able to parrot the stance of another member because you know them so well. And that's exactly what Derek just did. And I have nothing to add. But I think, Scott, that, and I welcome comments from broader NCME members about this, about what to elevate and foreground and what to push to the background, because there is power in that and influence in that. So it's a very fair point. We definitely discussed it. I agree with the consensus, but we now look to a broader consensus and would appreciate hearing from you and other members about this.
Great. Yeah, again, great work. And just one little parting comment about the question as Michael's students asked about certifying students. Again, speaking of fairness and validity, I think we'd want to know are programs providing opportunities to learn, right? And so maybe it starts with a self-evaluation of programs, and maybe you guys have that planned. So thank you all.
Thank you, Scott, and welcome to our last arriving task force member here. Terry's just joined us. I know he had a conflict until now, so welcome, Terry. But again, wonderful comments so far. I would love to, again, hear from others. Priya, it's great to see you on the list as well. Catherine, great to see you.
Hey.
Happy to have you chime in as well.
Yeah, well, I sent the one comment already to you. I know it's for part 2, but so that was seemed like a little bit oversight of not mentioning, contributions to the larger measurement field by psychometricians or researchers outside of academia. So I know you guys are already on that. But also just looking over part 1 in a little more in detail now. So it seemed like a lot of what's written is more sort of what we think traditionally of psychometrician or measurement specialists. But moving forward, there's all this movement to AI, machine learning, and game-based assessment comes up now and then, in and out of vogue and such, and just or personalized assessment, and just this need for going beyond what we currently have, and maybe sampling more from other fields and further in data science as well. So I don't know where you guys stand and thinking of this sort of next generation of measurement specialists, what that looks like.
What a great point. And I feel like Sue, Alina, and Sandeep, and many others can speak to this. Sue?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And we did put machine learning AI, we kind of sprinkled it throughout the report, both in the careers and in the curriculum portions and in the part 1. But admittedly, it's not as strong of a focus as it could be possibly. The part of this is balancing what psychometricians do now versus what they will do in 10 years versus what they will do in 5 years. And I do expect that the use of AI and the knowledge of machine learning capabilities and natural language processing tools and whatever will grow in the field. And since this is a living document over time, well, I hope it's a living document. Yeah, we will adapt to how the field is changing. I mean, one of the things we tried to put in, what we put into the careers section is the notion that educational measurement needs to evolve with the context in which it's used. And so it's a recognition that we need tools and our skill sets adapt with that evolving nature. And I'll hand it off to my colleagues to see if they have more to add.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Our idea was that we start with the foundation so that there is more freedom for departments and faculties to take this in different directions. For example, there are departments that are more focused on quantitative methods. There are more other departments more focused on learning. Others are exclusively on assessment. So we were trying to be somewhere in the middle and address all of the needs in terms of the basics, and then allow for potential enhancements in different in different departments, even with encouragement, for example, for students to attend other classes that are offered in other departments. So these were all parts of our discussions, at least.
Yeah.
And definitely we have people from the industry. I mean, Sue and I, Sandeep is here as well. So I think Derek did a nice job being diverse in terms of experiences and needs. I'm sorry about that. I'm actually in the middle of a street in Oxford, UK. So.
Thanks,
And
Selena.
doing an absolutely wonderful job of contributing nonetheless. Derek, anything to add?
Nonetheless.
I was just gonna, add one piece is like, I do think a key piece for me, part of my motivation for convening us and thinking about these foundational competencies is part in the book I wrote. As I went back historically and started thinking about measurement, how we think about measurement, I really believe that there are core ideas about measurement that while, the applications and the way we think about it and the context are always going to change and be important and critical to pay attention to. But I really believe that there are certain ideas and conceptualizations that are at the foundation that won't. And that, even people who enter from a data science perspective, if they haven't thought about the concept of reliability, right? Not just how to run code to produce an estimate, but what is the concept of reliability and why is this important? Right, then I think the field will be for the worse if we have people entering in and not thinking about those things. So that was what, in us thinking about foundational competencies and starting from what looks like traditional ideas, I agree. But I think some of these, just because it's traditional doesn't mean it couldn't be core and foundational. So that's the part I think we have to navigate. Are we really imagining that over time, what we think of as foundational and core, is that really changing? Or is it the context and the application that will evolve and change? And that's, I think, an open question for us.
Yeah, some of the most invigorating conversations we had, I mean, some of the most useful testimonials were from people like Sue and Alina, who are like, no, trust me, what we do is really quite unique in potentially more data-driven worlds, AI-driven worlds, and hence these competencies are distinctive in a way that we should call out and name, and so that in a world increasingly dominated by quote data science, people don't forget the core principles that Derek was articulating. Kate, it's great to see you too. Again, I don't mean to say that everyone who comes off video mute is raising their hand. But I'd be happy to have you chime in with a question or suggestion. Unless Catherine, you had any follow-ups?
No, that was great. Yeah, thanks so much.
Andrew, can I just add one thing real quickly?
Yeah, of course, Mike.
We had a lot of discussion about this idea of foundational, and Derek touched on this a little bit. Each of us has deep expertise in some area of educational measurement, and we were really trying to step back and say, if we think about someone coming through 2-3 courses, what is foundational for them to know so that they are prepared to develop expertise in a sub area of our field? So if other members kind of see this differently, that's kind of how I saw our conversation moving and what we're trying to do. We weren't trying to define what you need to be an expert in the field, but what do you need to enter to start becoming an expert.
Exactly right. Kate.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe this is in the report, but I'm wondering how you see the final product being used and implemented. There is so much diversity, and this is sort of what you are all just saying, that in the types of programs that might produce educational measurement professionals. So I know, when I was applying to grad school, it would have been great to have some type of competencies like this, tying together programs like educational psychology, psychometrics, educational measurement. So I'm wondering, do you see these programs sort of picking and choosing what sort of serves their program, or how would it aid the development of the curriculum, I guess?
Yeah, let me just bound this a little bit, right? The charge is the charge, right? To develop and maintain and engage the NCME membership and community through publications and events like these. I think all of us as individuals have potential aspirations and use cases for how this might evolve. And, Stephanie and I, for example, like I'm in a program that basically has one measurement person now that Dan Koritz has retired, right? And so this is like where I can show, I have a couple of students who are attending today, for example, and I can say like, look how big this world is, right? And look how much we need to cross across institutions and as a membership organization to learn from each other, right? And no one person, no one class is enough. So that is my personal hope for it. And I think others have others. I think there is a way in which the task force could come to greater consensus about this, but I'd love to hear some individual reflections for now about how this might be used beyond the charge, speaking for us as individuals.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak about it from my perspective, who does primarily data science work and works with a variety of folks in that area. Is I see the competencies from my perspective as a way to help data scientists understand why I'm asking the question of them and why I'm focusing on validity, reliability, and fairness, and why that's important from an educational measurement standpoint. So they may come in with very different skill sets, particularly around modeling and programming, but they may not really understand and measurement, I'll say. And so this is a way for me to communicate that effectively to those folks. It's also a way for me to think about job descriptions and how I really shape what those may be asking, because it provides a framework, at least for me as a professional, to think about, what do I want in terms of someone I'm looking for, not just in terms of the role, but in terms of how I think about the role.
I'll just add one piece from an academic context, like how I sort of imagine this could be helpful to graduate programs. We don't mean to be taking a authoritative, this is what you have to do perspective. That's not how we see this being taken up. And of course, that would not be well received. But we do think, and I think actually, that having some people that have thought through what these competencies might be and how they interrelate can be really helpful when you're looking at your own example of existing courses and say, hey, to what extent do the things that we structure in our courses touch onto these things? And it might suggest to you, as it has for me in looking over some of my courses, oh, here's a connection I haven't made that I could make. It was there. I just never called it out. And, and now I think this idea of sort of like, focusing, I think a lot of times we focus on syntax. We focus on how do you construct the model, like create a model, specify a model, estimate the parameters, but we don't take the big picture of where that fits into the educational measurement life cycle. And I think this can help us, see how this fits together and potentially really motivate some cool discussions among colleagues in academic circles. So that's one hope I have for where this could go.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I'd like to, oh, sorry, Andrew.
No, I was going to welcome others, yeah.
I want to amplify just a couple of things that my colleagues have mentioned. I think one thing we've really tried to point out is the importance of the intersection of multiple competencies. And we've tried to identify what we think are core or foundational. And we've also tried to describe how educational measurement could be covered in an introductory course or sequence of courses to introduce that big world that Andrew was talking about. And then, of course, I'm in a big measurement and quantitative method shop, so we're comprehensive, but many others have really focused in part because of personnel and because of the research interests of the particular faculty in a program area and because of the tradition of the program area, right? So we all know that there are some programs that have deep tradition and histories in scaling and equating, or are expanding standard setting, or are doing cognitive diagnostic modeling. And of course, those are natural areas of expertise given the folks that work there and given decisions over time in those institutions. And I think that's great because we need all of that together. And perhaps no one program can really prepare somebody to be an expert in all of those specific domains and models. I think what we're really trying to do is say, here is one view of the landscape. Here's what we believe to be part of that bigger world. And here are some things that we think are really foundational and a way to introduce the world of educational measurement in an introductory course or sequence.
Yeah, and I'd love to, happy to welcome Sandeep, Matt, and Terry, welcome again. So any other task force members, feel free to chime in on this. Great question, Kate. And I also, again, welcome questions from the other attendees here today.
Yeah, Andrew, I just wanted to follow up on what Derek and Michael said, because I think this is not the be all end all, that you must follow exactly what we're sort of describing in the document. I think what it should do is promote discussion and self-reflection in your program to see, maybe see your program in a different light. Are we teaching what people consider to be foundational skills and abilities? The other thing that I think is important is, if you look at measurement programs across the United States, they really vary in the size of their program. I think, you know, I am blessed to be at Iowa, which is historically, you know, deep in the Iowa testing program, equating, Deb Harris, and all of that. But I go from our program to your program at Harvard, and we have, you know, quite a few individuals, so we can be very comprehensive, very much like Michael at Minnesota. But at your end of the spectrum, things are a lot different. And so when you talk about reflecting on what you're teaching and what your graduates will leave your program with, it's a slightly different animal, because you have to, you know, play the hand that you're dealt. So I think that's really important to understand. Programs will differ depending upon how many faculty they have and the expertise of their faculty. And, you know, like this is, I think, again, that this document should just sort of promote self-reflection of your program.
I think this conversation actually segues into a really good question that Jessica Johnson put in the chat about measurement professionals having different levels of expertise in the different subdomains and kind of how we address that in the report. I think that the tenor and tone of the report is that we understand that careers and programs will drive students and learners towards different expertises. And for example, I knew I wanted to study diagnostic models, so I went heavy on diagnostic models, mathematical statistics, and so that drove my my time in graduate school. And I'm not so strong in other areas, and I'm aware of that. So there's a balance between kind of the breadth of covering competencies and also the depth that you go on specific ones. And we know that different people are going to take different routes. What we hope is that people will get a flavor of each, so that they have that context to be able to move forward in their different respective areas.
This is Sue, just to follow up on Matthew and Jessica's question. One of the ways I also interpreted your question was also about the range of things that educational measurement people do across the industry. They work at different places that could be educational measurement, say assessment companies, they could be government agencies, they could be Google, they could be Amazon, they could be consultants, whatever it is. And to write a document that tries to cohese all of the foundational competencies across these, you know, is a challenging endeavor. And we tried to reflect the range of skills and competencies that people would have across those fields, but any input you have to help us understand, you know, maybe you missed this area or this concept would be incredibly useful.
You know, building on what Matthew said, when you read the report, one of the flavors of the report is to speak about graduate students and learners, as lifelong learners. I mean, we did have conversations about that. Today, if one of my grad students goes off to work at ETS or ACT or any of the measurement, professional measurement companies around the United States, they will attend seminars and start to learn new techniques, new methods, new approaches. And we wanted to be sure that they had the foundational competencies to be strong learners, to understand in fact, you know, in this field, our field, it's changing so dramatically, especially in the past 10 or 12 years, that I think to be well equipped to go out into the professional world, you have to have the ability to, and the motivation to continue to want to learn new methods, new techniques. There's ample opportunity in the professional companies and organizations themselves, but also through NCME and AERA. There are every year there are professional development opportunities before the annual meetings where, you know, there's the opportunity to learn all manner of new methods and approaches, as well as some of the more traditional ones. But the ability to learn, I think, was a conversation, and the motivation to continue to learn was a conversation that we had throughout our discussions.
Absolutely right. Well said by all of you. Again, I welcome others. We probably have time for one or maybe time flies. One more question, if you like, or we can take two if there's interest, or feel free to drop it in the chat. Derek, I saw you come off mute though. Anything additional to add?
Wait and see if there's another question, but then I do have like one closing comment.
Again, don't make us call on you. Shalini, Jessica.
Well, I see there's only 2 minutes left, so in sort of being respectful.
I'll let you wrap up.
I guess what I want to just first do is I just want to thank everybody that's on the task force publicly. I want to just acknowledge the great work that everybody's done. And I want to give a special thanks to Andrew, because Andrew, in sharing this, really herding cats at times and really keeping us on track, really did a magnificent job. I just want to publicly acknowledge what a terrific job Andrew's done in sharing this task force. I'm really thrilled with it. And just for those who didn't have a chance to join live and are maybe watching this on video, I just want to encourage you to please read the report and give us any comments and feedback. We're really eager to get that feedback and to make an even better version that we put out into the field. We thank you very much.
Thank you all. More work to come.